Just ahead of Cubs baseball on WGN, Lauren Majera's back.
Sports reporter and anchor Lauren Majera is a familiar face on WGN TV. However, this was not always the case. Now, viewers take female sports journalists for granted, but the road to success is far from easy. Majera knows this all too well.
Being a female in sports, there's this stigma that people are going to be judging you way more harshly than they would if you were a man.
This kind of sexism was on display just months ago when Carolina Panthers quarterback Cam Newton made a dismissive remark to the Charlotte Observer female sports writer Jordan Rodriguez. She asked a question about wide receiver routes, to which Newton replied,
"It's funny to hear a female talk about routes, it's funny."
What is not funny is that women in sports, like Majera, deal with similar situations every day.
There are times where you're catcalled, you're treated as a sexual object, simply doing my job, and people will just attack you for just being a woman. I don't expect to be treated like a man because I'm not a man, but I also expect to be treated fairly.
These are lessons Majera learned from the very beginning. Majera grew up in Barrington, a northwest suburb of Chicago. She attended Barrington High School and received a Division I gymnastics scholarship to the University of Alaska Anchorage, where she competed for 4 years. Majera was a journalism major and got her first news internship, but she quickly learned her heart was in the sports department.
I was always sneaking off into the sports department to watch what game was going on, to just talk sports with the guys. And that's when my news director noticed how well I fit in that role and asked me if I would be interested in having a sports internship. And I honestly thought, would I be allowed to? Because I'm a girl. And I didn't think, honestly, I would be allowed to. I didn't ever think that I could hang with the guys. I didn't think that they would let me.
This internship led Majera into getting her first sports job in the #1 market in Alaska, where she covered everything from dog sled to snowmobile races.
We're standing at the start line of the Yukon Quest where 24 mushers and their sled dog teams begin their 1,000-mile trek to Whitehorse.
Although she enjoyed her time in Alaska, Majera wanted to move toward covering more traditional sports.
I could only cover so many dog sled races, snowmobile races, fishing tournaments. I had my own fishing show before I really wanted to cover professional sports. So I'd accepted a job in Wausau, Wisconsin as a sports director, and I was the first female sports director in that market.
Majera said she was honored to take on this job, but it did not come easy. Even in the interview process, Majera faced questions that men would not.
The news director said, "Could you please explain what a double play is for me?" And it was such a basic, easy question. I was confused because I thought it must be a trick question, and I wasn't sure what he meant by it. And so I got super flustered, and I realized he's literally judging my knowledge of sports, which is understandable. But then I in turn asked, "Would you ask a man this question? What a double play is in the game of baseball?" And he's realized that he wouldn't.
During her time as the sports director in Wausau, Majera became the Green Bay Packers beat reporter. She made great connections with the organization and eventually decided to leave her job in Wausau to join the Packers as an in-house host. There, Majera hosted a 30-minute pregame show with Packers Hall of Famer Larry McCarron.
I'm Lauren Majera, joined by Larry McCarron. The Packers are at 9-4. To get to be part of the Packers staff was such an honor. Even though I was raised as a Bears fan, it was really cool to get to work with such a first-class organization.
Majera's position with the Packers was only a seasonal gig and left her wanting more. That is when the station she grew up watching finally had an opening for a sports reporter and anchor.
This is the studio where Majera broke barriers in her career, becoming the first woman ever hired to report sports for Chicago's very own WGN News.
I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of that job, and just by the grace of God, I was able to be hired, and it was such a cool opportunity to walk into because Rich King, who had been at the station, I think for close to 35 years, was retiring, and so I stepped into his role, and they realized a female had never worked in the sports department on camera before.
During WGN's announcement of hiring Majera, she says many took to Facebook, leaving their sexist comments of disapproval.
It was disgraceful. that these people like still exist today, and that they have daughters, and that they have wives, and they're still like cutting down other women and not proud of their success.
In the era of social media, the backlash is immediately and constantly received.
People will tweet at me saying, oh, you're just a pretty face, or someone is writing scripts for you and in your ear telling you what to say.
Majera finds this insulting because she says she is the creative mind behind everything the audience sees on TV.
Not only did I write everything, but I also did all the photography, I also did all the editing, I also did the producing, did my own hair and makeup, my wardrobe, and I'm coming out and reading all the scripts that I wrote. And it's just insulting that people undermine that.
But people have been hating on women in sports since day one. This is part of the reason why it took so long for them to break into this profession in the first place. Senior instructor of journalism at DePaul University, Marla Kraus, was the first female sports editor for the Chicago Tribune. She recalls her story, similar to Majera's, as the only woman in one of Chicago's sports departments.
The Tribune was the only major newspaper in the country that didn't have a woman in the sports department at the time, and it was embarrassing to them. And they had asked lots of women who worked like in other parts of the paper if they'd work in sports, and like every single woman just said, like, are you crazy? Of course not. So I don't think I would have gotten hired if I hadn't said, yes, absolutely, I'd love to work in the sports department.
Kraus says Chicago sportscaster Jeannie Morris is the one who paved the way for women like her in sports.
She showed that, a woman could ask hard questions, and a woman could go, walk up to anybody and ask them whatever needed to be asked. And she never seemed to back down or shy away.
None of this would have happened for Majera or Kraus had it not been for Morris. Because of her foundation, both women were able to cover the sports and teams they loved.
It's been so surreal getting to cover the teams that I grew up watching, getting to be there for the World Series when the Cubs won it all, getting to cover the Blackhawks, the Bulls, the White Sox even, and the Bears.
Majera says she couldn't have achieved her dream of covering her favorite teams without all the supportive people around her.
And I had great people around me to remind me just to be confident in myself and don't let critics tear you down.
At the end of the day, Majera says that is what the solution comes down to: support. Women supporting other women and not tearing each other down, but building each other up. She says that is when a difference is made, and that is how we will continue to see the growth of females in the sports industry. For Good Day DePaul In Depth, I'm Jennifer Nazha.